What are tax credits, rebates, or government incentives for film productions? Why should you give a scheisse? And how can you leverage them to finance your movie or save money on your movie? See, I've been a filmmaker and a media producer in LA for the better part of 15 years now, and the details of film financing, well, it's just something I wish I would have learned a lot sooner. I've always been confused by legal and finance language, so I shied away from it. But once you familiarize yourself with these things, it's actually quite manageable. And now that I know a thing or two, just from having made a couple of films and I'm developing right now with a friend of mine, well, I regret not having informed myself on this stuff sooner. I always relied on other producers that I knew, or I would hire out and rely on other people to handle this stuff. But when I dug in, I noticed that most people just regurgitate what they've maybe heard from others, like that broken telephone game that you played as a kid. And that kind of means that the information that you get at the end of it, potentially how your movie's actually being structured and so forth, could be incomplete or just flat out wrong. So, in today's video, I'm going to laser in on a specific, commonly misunderstood, but critical, maybe kind of boring for you, but worth sticking around for. You're looking at the length of this video and you're thinking, oh geez. Believe me, it'll take you a lot longer to go find this out and research it yourself, so you're saving time here. It's a critical part of film financing, and it's important that you understand it, and it's also misunderstood. So at the end, I'm going to tell you how this might not always be the right thing to do. They're called incentives, and I'm going to do my best, of course, and within the confines of my pea-brain ability, to explain how they work in plain English so that you can use them to your benefit without being confused by a bunch of terms that make people feel smart but actually don't really mean that much. So that in your next film production or with your next project, you're always going to be able to think about this and incorporate it. I'm also going to share a couple of resources with you that you can use right away to educate yourself further or see what's available, in what states and so forth. So, by the way, this doesn't matter if you're doing a micro-budget film for almost no money or 50 grand or whatnot, or a $60 million action adventure. These incentives are things that you should understand, know about, and implement when and where it makes sense to. Now, here's a disclaimer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a high school dropout. I know nothing. I'm speaking from my perspective as an independent producer from my experience. So if you hear something that's not 100% accurate, I'm sorry. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to know here, and I can only share what I know. So if it's not 100% accurate, correct me. Put it in the comments. Tell me I'm an idiot. But please, after the idiot part, put the right answer so that we can all learn. I'll start by explaining what incentives are, and then list the different kinds of incentives that there are. I'll dig into the most important ones a little bit further so that you can understand them better. Again, try to use plain English here so it's not all weird and jargony and pointless. And then I'll give you some actionable ideas and resources that you can use to help finance your projects, like I already said. By the way, nice to meet you. My name is Daniel Brea. I've been making videos and films since I was a kid. I grew up 6,000 miles away from Hollywood. I dropped out of high school. I fought as a Special Forces soldier in the Near East. I lost myself. I found myself. I came to LA with nothing but a dream and $1,000 that my grandma gave me. I didn't go to film school. I didn't know anything or anyone here. And I still somehow managed to eke out a decent enough life as an independent film producer or filmmaker, media producer, entrepreneur in this space. And now I live in Beverly Hills with my awesome wife, 4 kids. I'm a member of the PGA, the Producers Guild of America, and I've launched and managed 3, at this point, 6- and 7-figure production companies, worked in television, produced independent feature films that have been financed, distributed in theaters, on TV, sold completely independently. I've had some help with it, of course. I'm not saying I did everything myself. I've also helped hundreds of established and beginning filmmakers grow their service businesses and get paid more for creatively fulfilling work and get their movies and TV shows sold and out there, for goodness sakes. Because what are we doing this for? I'm not saying this for any other reason than to motivate you to keep on keeping on, no matter where you're at in the industry, no matter if you've done this for 20 years. Things change. Stay on top of it. It's possible. You can do it. There are ways. So if I could do it with my lizard brain, you can do it too. Now, let's get into the video. By the way, do the whole YouTube thing, like, subscribe, share. And again, if you have a question, if you hear something that I'm not covering correctly, comment below and let me know what you would like to know about and how I was wrong. So, what's an incentive in plain English? Well, in a nutshell, an incentive is like a reward that the government gives you for making your movie in their state. So, you're a filmmaker, and you have a movie, and there's a little camera, And then here is Texas. Yep, that's Texas. And they want you to go there, and they give you a reward, a financial reward. That could be savings, that could be rebate. Well, we'll get into that stuff. So they're basically saying, come play here, and we'll give you some cookies. So why do they do it? Well, it stimulates the local economy, of course. Locals get hired. People who come in from out of town spend money there. It supports businesses in the area, so it's not just the production, local restaurants and storefronts and hotels and so forth. So you talk about the area, they, like I said, stay at hotels, and sometimes there's even a promotional thing. The state logo might end up on your movie if you take advantage of certain things. So it's a bit of an economy booster. It's a blanket term, so incentives is a blanket term. Let me just write down incentives. That's horrible. Let me try this. Try this again. I don't know how to write. I'm a high school dropout. I told you that. Incentive is a blanket term for several different kinds of these cookies, if you will, that states dish out. They vary from state to state and country to country, actually, by the way. So this is not just a U.S. thing. The type of incentive that they offer is usually tied to the resources that the state has available. There are usually what called annual caps, so there's a limit to what the state can give out. So, and it also depends on what kinds of projects that they're trying to support, and if they're trying to promote their own state for certain things. So some incentives are better for really small movies, some are better for kind of culturally involved or diverse films, and some are better for bigger movies. So if a state has no industry, for instance, and it's a relatively poor state, like Mississippi, for instance, they have incentives for projects with budgets as low as 50 grand. Whereas in California, you can't even apply unless you have a minimum of $1 million to spend on your production. And even then, it's a bit of a lottery. You're not sure if you're going to get it. So here are all the different kinds of incentives that I'm aware of, that you should know of, or that I think you should know of. There are several categories. Some are straightforward, and others break down into subcategories. So I'll not go super depth into all of them, like I said, because we'll be here all day, but I'll give you more information on how you can go research this on your own, and you can drill in further from there. So, by the way, there's some caveats to these as well. There are qualifying expenses and some things that don't qualify. So don't just think, well, okay, I have 500 grand and then everything is going to apply towards the credit. You have to work with potentially a professional that understands like what qualifying expenses are, or at the very least do your research if you're really, really a tiny team. So whatever you do, it's always a good idea to go to the state tax authority or the film commission's websites and just kind of make sure that you read all the fine print and know what you're doing. There's also timelines, some you need to submit sooner, some you can basically submit days before you shoot, some you can basically submit while you're in production. So it just kind of depends. But you want to maximize your incentive, so you want to kind of know about all of these different things so you can stack them, rack them, and get the most out of it. In some cases, well, anyway, I won't jump the gun. So incentives essentially break down into a couple of categories. The main ones are tax credits, rebates, and grants. So you have tax credits, rebates, and grants. There's also waivers and stuff, but I'll talk to you about that in a second. Let's start with tax credits. Okay, this is a tax credit is when a state government reduces the amount of tax liability or taxes that you owe to the government from making your film. Yes, just like any other business, movies pay taxes. And there are three kinds of tax credits that I'm aware of. So you go, you spend your money, and then Uncle Sam wants his cut from that, so you're supposed to pay him. And a tax credit is where Sam says, no, thank you. You can keep that part, and gives it back to you, or doesn't even make you pay it in the first place. So what are the different types of tax credits? Well, the first one is called a refundable tax credit. I won't write tax credit every time. We'll be here all day. And with this incentive, the state actually refunds you or pays you back with real money. If the tax credit the state offers is higher than what you owe in taxes, they will send you a check generally after you finish your movie. So for example, if your refundable tax credit is 100K, so meaning the Sam here has 100K, he says up to 100,000. Why is this coming up? Up to 100,000 in taxes. You'll say, let's just say 10% tax, right? So you spend $1 million, you owe 100,000 in taxes. So you have a refundable tax credit of up to 100,000. And let's say you came in with your taxes that you owe are 50 grand. Then your film, when your film is completed, they will send you a check for 50 grand. So he'll take this because the cap is 100,000. They'll take 50 and they'll send it back to you. Okay? As long as everything, all the things that you submitted for and pay taxes on qualify for the refundable tax credit. And that's a great reason to be on top of keeping receipts and invoices and tracking every dollar that you spend. Refundable tax credits are generally for things like hiring local crew, renting spaces and equipment, and other production-related expenses. Generally, there's other ones too. And as far as I know, they're not transferable. But that brings me to the second one. Okay? So the next one is a transferable. Look at that. Some letters are capitalized, some are not. That's what a high school dropout does. So what a filmmaker could do here to get money up front, because we all know you need money to make the film. Actually, you know what? I'm going to talk. I'm not ready for transferable yet. Put a pin in this. We're still talking about refundable. What you could do in the case of a refundable tax credit, because you want the money up front, right? So you're thinking, well, how does this do me any good if I'm, going to have to make the film and then get my money, right? So in this case, what you could do if you need money up front, because we all know you need money to make the movie, you can find people and companies, banks, for instance, or investors who will give you a loan. It's called a debt investor, not an equity investor, because they are giving you debt, essentially, but they will put a loan towards the tax credit, the refundable tax credit. So if you've done your production budget and estimated that you will get $50,000 back, like we said earlier, someone might write you a check for $45,000, for instance. Now these numbers vary, right? This is for the sake of argument, and then ask you to give them the 50 once it comes in from the state. So in a sense, you get that kind of free money, I guess you could call it, ahead of time. And for them, it's a pretty sure thing, because government incentives are government incentives. And as long as you finish the movie and do what you said you would do, and you weren't lying about your expenses, they're going to get their money back, okay? With a little bit of commission. So now let's go into transferable tax credits. Okay? We went from refundable to transferable. These are kind of interesting because they can be transferred to other taxpayers in the state. So if a state has a $100,000 transferable credit, but you can't really use it for your production for whatever reason, maybe you don't owe taxes in that state, for instance, you can sell the tax credit to another corporation or a person, like a bank, for instance, that does pay a lot of taxes in the state, and they can apply it to their taxes. And they'll give you cash for it. Okay? Of course, it's a bit of work for the people buying it from you, so they'll generally, again, put a little bit of a fee on it, make a little money on it themselves. So you might sell your $100,000 tax credit to a bank for $90,000, but now you have 90 grand that you'd otherwise not have. So just to clarify, you are making a movie. That is a film slate. That's one thing I do know how to draw. And you don't owe any taxes. But you're like, I'm in a state that has 100K tax credit. What do? I want this money. Well, here's, Jeff's bank place. He's been there for 45 years, a family business, quite an established one though, and he pays taxes to, his home state all the time. He's there. He's like, man, I wish I could get a little bit more of a tax break. Well, here comes Mr. or Mrs. Filmmaker, sells them their $100,000 tax credit, and Jeffy says, well, okay, I'll make another 10 grand on it. Here, take your 90K, go make your movie, or here, finishing funds, here you go, whatever. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but we can't make the whole movie with tax credits because it implies that you need to have a budget that you're even paying taxes on. So, but Jeff gets another tax break. The government doesn't care, and this whole little ecosystem, is complete. So that's a pretty interesting thing. It almost feels like it's illegal, like you're selling your tax credit to another business, but it's not. It's actually legit, and the government makes it available for you. Then number 3 is non-refundable tax credits. Now, what does this mean? This is much more limited and straightforward. You can't transfer it. You can't really do much with it. There's no check issued by the state. And it's simply a deduction of tax liability, meaning, in other words, if the tax credit, again, is $100,000 and you owe less than $100,000 in taxes on qualifying items, you'd simply not have to pay the tax. So if you owe more than $100,000, you would be on the hook for paying the difference. So if you owe $125K, you'd only have to pay $25,000 in taxes. So that's pretty straightforward, and I'm not going to make a little illustration about everything here. So we have transferable, non-transferable, we have refundable, transferable, and non-refundable tax credits, okay? There's no good way I found to turn the non-refundable tax credit into money up front. Maybe you know something I don't. Let me know. Post in the comments if you think of something that might work. But it's still a big savings on your production and allows you to put more money into the film and consequently onto the screen where it matters the most. In some places, taxes are pretty high. So now let's go on to the next type of incentive. The next type of incentive is called a rebate. Some people say tax rebate, and some people say get tax credits and rebates confused. They're not the same thing. Rebates are directly linked to the qualifying expense itself, rather than taxes making them a lot more straightforward for production. So rebates are a lot more straightforward, where in a tax incentive situation, you have $1 million, well, I'll just do $1 million, right, for your movie budget. You go to a state, ambiguous state, Colorado. They have a tax incentive. They have a tax credit, let's say, of 20%. You spend your $1 million, and once it's all said and done, depending on which tax credit it is, they either save you or return 20% tax credit on your taxes, as opposed to a rebate being a direct exchange. So again, like if you have $100,000 in taxes off of this $1 million, you will get your incentive, your credit on those taxes, not the whole budget that you're spending. Rebate puts cash or kicks back cash from the state for a percentage of your spend. So if a state has a 30% rebate program and you spend $1 million on qualifying expenses, that state, again, like locations, rentals, crew, etc., you would submit those expenses to the state, and after an audit, they would provide you with $300,000 back in cash on your whole budget. So if you spend $1 million here and there is a rebate program, you will get a 30%, let's say, rebate program, you would get $300,000 back from the government, from your movie budget, okay? Not just the taxes. This is a great tool to raise money up front, and you'd want to find a debt investor, again, like before, who would put up the estimated kind of cashback amount against the rebate with some interest, of course, so you could show a lender that you're going to get a $300,000 rebate, and they could either write you a check for $280,000 right there. That's just a figure. I don't know what the exact number is going to be. It's going to vary from deal to deal, but there's going to be some kind of a commission or interest, right? And then you would, and then they would take the $300,000 when it comes back in after your rebate is complete, and the movie's usually done. So that's a rebate. Now, there's something called a sales and use tax exemption. Oops. Sales and use tax exemption. I'm not going to try to write exemption in front of you guys. This is a bit of a smaller incentive, but it adds up, right? So this incentive simply waives the sales tax on approved purchases and rentals. So if, for example, Maryland has a 6% sales tax just in the state, it can apply for an exemption. You can apply for exemption through getting a certificate from the state tax authority, or sometimes there's just forms that you fill out, like in California. I'll talk about that in a little bit, the post-production tax, and present it at the point of sale to have the sales tax basically waived right then and there for approved purchases and rentals too, and things related to your production. So if you're renting $50,000 in production equipment and the state has or the area you're in has a 6% sales tax, that would be waived, and that would save you basically $3,000 right then and there. I think there's some states where you pay and get a rebate later. I'm not sure. But as far as I know, in most cases, it's kind of instant at the point of sale. And so, like I said earlier, some states like California have partial exemptions. So in California, there's something called the post-production tax, where if you buy, not even related to any specific project, but if you as a company or as a producer deal in post-production, which anybody who makes movies does, and you buy any hard drive or computer or anything like that that's used for post-production 50% or more of the time that it's being used, you get a reduced tax rate on it. When I do this in LA, I don't even apply to the tax authority. A lot of vendors just have the forms. You fill them out, they submit them for you, and you just pay less tax. The last time I've done it, it was years ago, and back then it went from like 9% or something to 3%. So it's a pretty significant sales tax reduction on hard drives. And you know, those things add up. Computers, you buy a Mac Pro, you end up paying a lot of tax on it. So that's a good thing for you to think about too. Now, the other kind of incentive is a grant. And a lot of people maybe know about this one. A grant is direct funding for your project. It's not tied to taxes. It's not a rebate. It's not an incentive of any kind of like, it's not tied to you spending money first. Everything that we've done so far, actually didn't mention this, every state has like a required amount that you would need to come in with. So you can't just go to a state that has a 30% rebate program, not have any money and get the rebate. In Georgia, you have to have 500,000 already raised for you to even qualify to submit. So if you have a $500,000 check that you deposited and you're sitting in your equity account or escrow account ready to make the movie, you can prove that, apply for the incentives, and upon completion, you'll get, $100-something thousand back from the state of Georgia. So it's pretty nice, but you got to have that first money, right? A grant does not require any funding to be in place at all. So it's clean cash given to you upfront to finance your film. And most grants have a rigorous application process. It's very specific most of the time. And grants are also given out by non-government entities. You know, a lot of nonprofits have grants, art nonprofits, things like that. But governments have them too. And we're just talking about government stuff here, state governments. And there's usually specific criteria for the creative, for the concept of the film. So you can't just rock up with any movie usually. The team criteria is usually very tight because they're specifically designed to stimulate a certain part of, you know, the economy or the culture in that state. And there are often extensive wait times. And frankly, I don't really deal with grants too much. You know, I mean, it's not a horrible idea because they have a relatively low success rate. It's a bit like a lottery. You know, there's a lot of people applying for them, I guess. And there's not that much to go around usually. So the chances of actually getting them are fairly low. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. I just feel like there's, you know, other ways for you to finance your films that have less restrictions and might not necessarily move quicker, but there's more things out there. They also usually are not very big in dollar amount. So, you know, there's not $20 million grants laying around waiting for you to go pluck them. Through some governments who really want to push production in their area, they'll offer grants that may be worth pursuing, but some might be like 10 grand or, you know, it's you'd have to do a little more research on that. Honestly, I'm a little weak on this topic. If you have a script and a team that qualifies, of course, again, right? So you have to meet their criteria, and you, as a filmmaker, also sometimes have to meet their criteria. Like it might just be for first-time filmmakers, or it might just be for, you know, whatever. So that's grants. Now I'm going to quickly cover a couple more incentives that are specific kinds of waivers, credits, and so forth, because I know I haven't talked about waivers yet, but I'm assuming you understand what a waiver is, and if you don't, it just means they waive something. They mean they cancel it, not in the today's known meaning of canceling. So I'm just going to keep going. Lodging and tax waivers. So who can guess what this is? I'm dyslexic. You see that? I actually am. So if I forget a letter, don't make fun of me. See, I did it again. Waivers. Okay. Lodging and tax waivers. Some states waive the taxes you'd have to pay on hotels for cast and crew. Okay? Lodging is simply hotels. And places to sleep. And they want you to stay there, so they waive the taxes. Now there's, you know what? I'm not going to keep writing these down. We're going to waste too much time. Workforce development incentives. Some states offer traditional tax credits for hiring local crew, like New Mexico can give you an additional 5% on your tax credit. Remember, the tax credit is what you get back from your taxes. So they'll offer another 5% if you work with local residents. Then there's something called rural or economical disadvantage area bonuses. Rural or economical disadvantage area bonuses. Some states want to help distressed and rural areas in their state. So like New York, for instance, everybody goes to New York City. Nobody goes to Buffalo. Well, now they're starting to go there. Actually, I'm going to mention that in a second. So they might add an additional 5 to 10% tax credit if you take your production to smaller, impoverished, or just kind of out there in the boondocksy towns or rural areas, because they want to stimulate those areas as well. So if you film in New York City, like I said, you'd get your New York City incentive, your New York incentives, the ones that everybody gets in New York. But if you go upstate, you can get an extra 10% on qualifying things like labor and stuff, because they want people to work up in Buffalo just as much. So Buffalo is actually turning into quite a film town. My friend Jonathan Sanger, who's made a lot of cool movies, shot Marshall and Chadwick Boseman, and his last movie Cabrini. He shot it in Buffalo, and it worked out pretty well for him. By the way, if you should look for the Rap Book podcast, which is my podcast with Jonathan Sanger, and you can hear all kinds of cool stories from The Elephant Man, Vanilla Sky, and all kinds of other cool movies that he produced, and we talk shop and learn a lot. So then there is something called the post-production and VFX or visual effects credits. Some states want to bring in more editing, post-production, or VFX work. So they have special tax credits just for post. So you could shoot your film in LA or in Alabama or in New Mexico, and then you could edit it and do post-production in New York and take advantage of this. And I think in New York it's actually a 30% tax credit on post-production. So if your state doesn't have great post-tax incentives, you can find one that does and save a little money or make a little money or get a little money up front if you play the game like I told you earlier. Now there's infrastructure credits. This is maybe for slightly bigger productions, but some states give tax credits on productions that contribute to improving or building production facilities. Have you noticed that studios are popping up everywhere? Well, they may be in states that offer nice incentives on taxes for doing that. So if you have a film or maybe a TV show that justifies building, or maybe you have a slate and it justifies building or renovating a soundstage or a studio, you could get some pretty healthy tax credits on your investment to do so, okay? And then this is a cool one. So I talked about grants earlier. There's something called development grants. For those of you who don't know what development is, it's the front part of the movie, the thing that nobody wants to pay you for. So development grants are given for the early stages of making a film, meaning it's free money given by the government to filmmakers to develop their screenplay, to create pitch materials, to raise funds for the film. And so it essentially covers the cost of everything needed before a film is actually pitched and funded and produced. And development funds are not easy to get anywhere. And nobody wants to put money in development anymore. They want you to have a finished script and everything. So these grants are also not easy to get, but if you qualify, and again, it's because it's a grant, it has certain criteria, but if you qualify, and it's almost always, as far as I know, contingent upon the film actually shooting in the state that the grant was issued by. So if New Mexico is giving you one, I don't know if they have a development grant, but if they're going to give you the grant, they want you to shoot in New Mexico, right? So, but small price to pay, because nobody's going to pay you to write your script anyways. So if you qualify and you fit all the criteria, that's a pretty cool thing. So it's definitely worth knowing about. And, like I said, getting money for development is incredibly hard the way it is. So you might as well try and find some development grants and apply. What do you got to lose? It's generally meant to stimulate cultural, well, I don't know if this is the rule of thumb, if it's everywhere, but I think the last thing I want to say about the development grants is that, if Alabama, for instance, I believe has one where they pay you to develop scripts But the scripts they all have to be around the topic of the cultural history of Alabama, right? So if you have something to say about that, you have a story that fits there, then you might want to apply. Okay, so again, just because it's a grant, there's criteria, and you're not going to be able to rock up with your next like horror film to a place like Alabama and think that they're going to pay for your screenplay. Okay, so the next thing is called local incentives. Some cities inside states will have their own little incentives. So if you're a qualified production, they'll give you credits for using public areas and facilities in their city. They may waive city permit fees. They might offer rebates for hiring crew from their city. So that's a pretty cool thing to know about too. So always check your local city. Like if you're going to go shoot somewhere, check the city as well as the state. And then there's green or sustainable production incentives. Some states offer additional incentives, usually tax credits or rebates, for using environmentally friendly and sustainable production practices, like using solar power, energy efficient lighting, recycled materials, water conserving facilities, and so forth. Low waste producing set builds, processes that save on waste and keep the earth a cleaner place. They'll give you kickbacks for that too. And then this is not really a kind of incentive, but remember in the beginning I mentioned caps. So the cap is called an annual cap. So if I believe, let's say, California has I think it's a 700 million annual cap, right? Most states have annual caps, total caps. And this is, California is a big state. And so this is a pretty high cap, meaning there's a cap on the total amount of incentives that can be issued to all production in a given year. So, if you qualify, you might not qualify that year. You might have to try for the next one if it's all sort of maxed out. And when it's gone, it's gone. So one of the reasons why it's hard to qualify for incentives in California is actually because there's so many productions here. And it's like a lottery because there's more demand than there is supply for the incentives. So there's simply not enough money to give incentives to all the productions. So they go other places. Some states don't have caps. So the incentives, a place with no annual cap is an incredibly attractive place because you're more sure that you're going to get your incentives. You're basically guaranteed to get them if you do things right. Can you guess one state that has no annual cap? Georgia, of course. Understand why Atlanta now is blowing up the way it is? I mean, it's not the only reason, but they have really solid incentives over there. There's no annual cap, so it's a free for all. It's a party out there. And actually, Georgia leads me to the next one. There's marketing bonuses. Now we're back to writing. No, we're not. I'm not going to waste time here. Marketing bonuses. Some states, like Georgia, ever seen a little peach on a movie poster or in the credits? They want to bring you and shoot there. They want to incentivize that even more. What am I trying to say? Simply by adding the state logo to your credits and marketing materials. So that's all you got to do. And in Georgia, you get an additional 10%, which is quite significant on top of their existing incentive. And it's as simple as just putting the logo at the end of your movie and your marketing materials for the film because they want to promote the state of Georgia. Why wouldn't they? And finally, this is the last one, there's international production incentives. So some states make it easier for foreign productions to film in the United States, so they offer credits to filmmakers who want to come here to make their movies. Now, we've covered a lot. Thanks for listening. But before you go, keep one important thing in mind. And this is actually really important. You have to take the film in its entirety. These are incentives. A lot of them deal with already having money in place. But there are ways for you to get that money sooner, right? But you got to look at your whole movie. Incentives are great, but they can lead you astray. And what do I mean by that? For instance, if you're making a film, or you're a filmmaker in any given state, before you commit to filming in another state, because of all the great incentives, figure out what it would actually cost to film where you are. Make a real budget first. Don't just go somewhere because they have a 30% tax credit and another 10% for, a rural incentive or something like that. Take into account the added flights, hotel costs, labor fees, actual location costs compared to where you are, and you might find that even with the incentives in place, you're better off filming where you are right now. And your state might even have some incentives. There's very few states that don't have anything. but they might be really cheap to film otherwise. Like the same kind of location in your state might cost a quarter or an eighth of what it might cost to shoot in New York. So the added cost of doing your film somewhere else might actually offset or even exceed the cost of filming locally. So keep that in mind. If you're interested in diving into any specific state, there's a great website I'm going to link in the description. Entertainment Partners is a great company. I'm not affiliated with them, but they have this cool map. Now, they don't cover all the types of incentives, but it'll give you a great little overview. You can hover over this map and let's say, click on Georgia here, and it'll show you kind of what the eligible production types are, location production needs, and Entertainment Partners offer services like they'll actually give you a loan against your tax incentives or your rebates if you want to work with them. I would check a few places, just get the rates right, but it'll show you a lot of details here. You see this is 20 to 30% transferable tax credit, Georgia. And it'll give you a lot of good information on every one of these states. So definitely go check out this link here, Entertainment Partners. You just go to ep.com/production-incentives/US to get that information. You can also check specific states' film commission websites. So just Google Texas Film Commission or Texas Film Tax, Texas Tax Authority, or simply Google Production Incentives Texas, or insert name of your state. So there's going to be the Entertainment Partners link below. Again, like and subscribe if you found this valuable. Comment below if you found a mistake, if I'm stupid, or if you have an idea for another video. Check out more of my stuff in the description. There's some links to other things. And off we go. Thanks for watching.